high above the bustling metropolis, where the air thinned and the clouds parted, floated the legendary Skyreach, a restaurant that defied not only gravity, but also the conventional boundaries between species. Its anti-gravity platforms suspended crystal dining domes among the clouds, making it the most exclusive establishment in the city. Here, the elite of both human and dragon societies came to see and be seen, though rarely did they mingle beyond necessary interactions. Riker Drakenfire adjusted his titanium cufflinks as the private elevator ascended to Skyreach. Beside him, his 10-year-old son Lucian fidgeted with the straps of his wing braces, an elaborate titanium framework that supported his damaged left wing. The young dragon's scales gleamed a pale gold in the elevator's soft lighting, but his eyes remained downcast, fixed on the floor. "Remember what we discussed," Riker said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the air around them. "Stand tall. You are a Drakenfire." Lucian nodded without looking up. "Yes, Father." It was their first public dinner since the accident 6 months ago, an ill-fated flying lesson that had resulted in a wing fracture so severe that even the most advanced regenerative technologies had struggled to repair the damage. The medical experts had promised a full recovery eventually, but for now, the braces were necessary, but also a visible reminder of what Lucian saw as his failure, what Riker saw as his own failure. The elevator chimed, its doors sliding open to reveal the maitre d', a slender dragon with silver-blue scales, who bowed deeply at the sight of Riker. "Mr. Drakenfire, what an honor! Your usual table has been prepared in the Eastern Dome. The view of the sunset will be spectacular tonight." Riker nodded curtly, placing a protective hand on Lucian's shoulder as they were escorted through the main dining area. Heads turned, both human and dragon, as they passed. Whispers followed in their wake. The Drakenfires were royalty in their world, owners of the city's tallest building and controllers of its most advanced anti-gravity technology empire. But tonight, the whispers held a different note, and Riker knew exactly what they were saying. "Poor boy. Such a shame about his wing. I heard he'll never fly properly again. The Drakenfire heir, grounded forever." Riker's jaw tightened, but he maintained his impassive expression. Show no weakness. It was the first rule of business, the first rule of parenting, the first rule of survival in their world. In the Eastern Dome, their table awaited, a polished obsidian surface, surrounded by cushions designed for dragon comfort, positioned perfectly to overlook the city below. As they settled in, a human waitress approached. She was slender, with dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, wearing the standard Skyreach uniform of black and silver. Her name tag read, Daria Jensen. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and pleasant. "May I offer you anything to drink while you look over the menu?" Riker barely glanced at her as he ordered a rare vintage of flame-fermented wine for himself and a sparkling glacier water for Lucian. The waitress, Daria, nodded, her movements efficient as she poured the water from a crystal decanter. When she leaned down to place Lucian's glass, she did something unexpected. She smiled directly at the young dragon, meeting his eyes when he finally looked up. "Would you prefer lemon or lime with your water?" she asked, as if he were any other customer, as if the titanium braces embracing his left wing were invisible. Lucian blinked, startled by the direct address. Most servers spoke only to his father. "Lime, please," he answered softly. "Excellent choice," Daria replied, adding a perfect wedge to his glass. "The menu tonight features a special on cloud-seared salmon that pairs wonderfully with lime." It was a small interaction, so brief that Riker hardly registered it as he surveyed the other patrons of the restaurant. He was looking for business opportunities, for competitors, for anything but the one thing he couldn't bear to see: pity directed at his son. Their meals arrived, exquisitely prepared and artfully presented. Riker ate mechanically, his mind drifting to upcoming board meetings and acquisition plans. Lucian picked at his food, occasionally stealing glances around the restaurant. The ambient music shifted. A subtle change in the background melody as the anti-gravity orchestra in the center of Skyreach began a new composition. This piece was different, featuring experimental anti-grav instruments that caused musical notes to visibly ripple through the air, creating wave patterns of sound that could be seen as well as heard. Several patrons on the main floor moved to the small dance area, their bodies swaying with the visible currents of music. Lucian's head lifted, his eyes tracking the dancing patterns of sound with genuine interest for the first time that evening. Daria returned to check on their meal, noticing the young dragon's fascination with the music. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, as she refilled his water glass. "The composer is actually half human, half dragon. One of the first to create music that appeals equally to both species' sensory systems." Lucian's eyes widened slightly. "Really? I didn't know that was possible." "Many things are possible that we haven't tried yet," Daria replied with a smile. Perhaps it was the music, or perhaps it was those simple words. But something shifted in that moment. Lucian straightened slightly in his seat, his braced wing adjusting with a soft mechanical whir. As Daria turned to leave, he suddenly extended his clawed hand toward her, a gesture so unexpected that she paused mid-step. Would you dance?" The young dragon's voice was barely audible, but his eyes held a fragile hope that seemed to illuminate his entire face. The ambient conversation in their section of the restaurant stuttered to a halt. Riker froze, his wineglass halfway to his lips, as shocked by his son's unexpected request as by the public attention it immediately drew. Thornwood, the restaurant manager, materialized beside their table with alarming speed. He was a tall, thin human with a perpetual expression of controlled disdain that had been perfected over decades of catering to the elite. "Miss Jensen," he hissed, "please attend to table 12 immediately. I'll handle the Drakenfire party personally." Turning to Riker with an unctuous smile, he continued, "My sincere apologies, sir. This server is relatively new and clearly doesn't understand proper protocol. I assure you she will be appropriately disciplined for this disruption to your evening." Riker finally found his voice, though it emerged strangely strangled. "Lucien, that's enough. This is highly inappropriate." But Daria Jensen didn't move toward table 12. Instead, she slowly untied her server's apron and handed it to the astonished Thornwood. "My shift ends in 15 minutes anyway," she said calmly. Then, she turned to Lucian, whose hand had begun to withdraw, his momentary courage crumbling under the weight of the attention. "I would be honored to dance with you, but only if you lead." "Miss Jensen," Thornwood spluttered, "your employment will be terminated immediately if you—" "Then consider this my notice," Daria replied, her eyes never leaving Lucian's. She extended her hand toward the young dragon. "Shall we?" The restaurant had gone completely silent now, the anti-grav orchestra's music the only sound as Lucian hesitantly rose from his seat. The titanium braces on his wing clicked and whirred as he moved, adjustments happening automatically as he stood straighter than he had in months. Riker found himself unable to speak, unable to move, unable to process what was happening as his son carefully took the human woman's hand and led her to the edge of their elevated dining platform. The main dance floor was below them, but the music's visible waves reached everywhere in Skyreach. Lucian's movements were tentative at first, his balance clearly affected by the wing braces. But Daria followed his lead with natural grace, adjusting to his rhythm without making it obvious she was accommodating his limitations. She simply danced with him, letting him guide their movements as the music's colorful patterns swirled around them. Something extraordinary began to happen. The expressions on the faces watching them transformed, from shock and disapproval to something like wonder. The young dragon's movements became more confident with each step, his damaged wing and its supporting framework no longer a burden, but simply a part of him as he moved to the music. And Riker felt something crack inside his chest. A memory surfaced with such vivid intensity that it stole his breath. Arya, his mate, Lucian's mother, dancing with their son when he was barely able to walk. Her wings encircling them both as they moved to music only they could hear. The joy on her face, the love that had filled every moment before the illness took her 3 years ago. Before he realized what he was doing, Riker had risen to his feet. The movement drew Thornwood's attention, the manager clearly expecting the powerful dragon to put an end to this unprecedented scene. "Sir, I'll have security remove her immediately," Thornwood offered. "That won't be necessary," Riker said, his voice oddly quiet. His eyes remained fixed on his son, who was actually smiling now, a sight so rare in recent months that it felt like witnessing a miracle. "When they finish, please ask Miss Jensen to join us at our table." The dance lasted only a few minutes, but in that brief span of time, something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of Skyreach. As the music faded, scattered applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Lucian bowed to Daria with formal dragon etiquette. His cheeks flushed with a combination of exertion and embarrassment, but his eyes, bright with something like pride. When they returned to the table, Riker stood. He towered over Daria, his massive draconic form casting her in shadow. But she met his gaze steadily. "Miss Jensen," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "would you join us for dessert?" Surprise flickered across her face before she composed herself. "Thank you, but I should be going. I have an early morning tomorrow." "I understand." Riker reached into his jacket and withdrew a sleek business card made of burnished metal. "Then, perhaps you would consider visiting Drakenfire Tower tomorrow. Say, noon. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Daria hesitated before accepting the card. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Riker glanced at Lucian, who was watching the exchange with undisguised curiosity. "A proposition," he said simply. "One that I believe might interest you." She slipped the card into her pocket. "I'll think about it," she replied, which wasn't the automatic acceptance Riker was accustomed to receiving. Then she turned to Lucian with a genuine smile. "Thank you for the dance. You have excellent rhythm." After she left, Thornwood hovered anxiously nearby until Riker dismissed him with a gesture. Father and son sat in silence for several moments before Lucian finally spoke. "Are you angry, Father?" Riker considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "I'm surprised, but not angry." "She treated me like I was normal," Lucian said softly. "Not broken." The words struck Riker like a physical blow. Had he been treating his son as broken? Had his protective instincts, his determination to shield Lucian from pity, actually reinforced the very thing he was trying to prevent? "You're not broken," Riker said firmly. "You're healing. There's a difference." Lucian nodded, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. For the first time, Riker wondered if the braces supporting his son's wing were really the problem, or if the real constraints were the ones he himself had imposed in his desperate attempt to protect what remained of his family. The next day, precisely at noon, Daria Jensen arrived at Drakenfire Tower, the tallest building in the city. It rose like a gleaming spire of metal and glass, its upper levels literally piercing the cloud layer. The anti-gravity technology that had made the Drakenfire fortune was on display throughout the structure. Floating meeting pods, hovering artwork, even a central atrium where executives could practice short flights between platforms. Daria was escorted directly to Riker's private office on the 150th floor. The vast space offered panoramic views of the city below, the walls lined with rare artifacts and impressive artwork. Riker stood at a floating console, reviewing holographic displays that vanished with a wave of his hand as she entered. "Miss Jensen, thank you for coming." He gestured toward a seating area where both human-style chairs and dragon resting platforms were arranged around a low table. "Please, make yourself comfortable." She chose a chair that placed her at eye level with him. Not an easy feat, given the significant difference in their heights, and waited as he settled his massive form onto a platform designed to accommodate his wings. "I'll be direct," Riker began. "What you did for my son yesterday was unexpected, but clearly beneficial. I'd like to arrange for you to work with him on a regular basis." Daria's expression remained neutral. "Work with him how exactly?" "Private sessions, dancing, movement therapy. Whatever you did that engaged him so effectively. Name your price. I can arrange for you to have access to our private rehabilitation facilities. The best equipment. Whatever you need." "Mr. Drakenfire," Daria said carefully, "I'm not a therapist. I'm a waitress who's studying adaptive education. What happened yesterday wasn't a therapy session. It was simply treating your son like a person worthy of respect and autonomy." Riker's eyes narrowed slightly. "I assure you, I respect my son. With all due respect, sir, you may be confusing protection with respect. They're not the same thing." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Riker's nostrils flared, a wisp of smoke escaping before he controlled himself. Few people dared speak to him so directly, and certainly not humans employed in service positions. "You seem to have formed quite an opinion of my parenting based on a single interaction," he said coldly. "Not at all," Daria replied, maintaining her composure. "I'm merely observing that there's a difference between protecting someone from harm and protecting them from experiences that might actually help them grow." She reached into her bag and withdrew a tablet, activating it with a touch. "Since we're being direct with each other, I should tell you that I have no interest in becoming your son's private special server, or whatever you're proposing. However, I would like to invite Lucian to participate in a program I help run." She turned the tablet toward him, displaying a logo that featured stylized wings and the word Wingspan beneath it. Wingspan is a community-based flight therapy program I co-founded with my sister Zara 2 years ago. We work with young dragons who have wing injuries or congenital flight issues. Our approach focuses on peer support, adaptive flight techniques, and building confidence through incremental success. Riker studied the information on the tablet with growing skepticism. "This appears to be operating out of a converted warehouse in the Lower East District. Hardly the state-of-the-art facility I had in mind." "We work with what we have," Daria acknowledged. "And what we have are remarkable results. Our participants show significantly faster recovery rates and better psychological outcomes than traditional rehabilitation approaches." "Based on what evidence?" "I'm glad you asked." She swiped to a new screen, showing charts and data tables. "We've been collaborating with Dr. Elena Marsh at Central University on a research study. The preliminary findings are quite compelling, though we're still collecting data for formal publication." Riker frowned. "If your program is so effective, why haven't I heard of it? Why aren't the top medical professionals recommending it?" "Because we're not part of the established medical industrial complex," Daria replied simply. "We're grassroots, community-funded, and operating outside the traditional rehabilitation paradigm. And frankly, our participants typically don't come from families like yours." The implication was clear. Wingspan served those who couldn't afford the elite medical care that the Drakenfires took for granted. Those from the wrong side of the species and class divides that define their society. Riker stood abruptly, moving to the window to gaze out at his city. From this height, the divisions between districts blurred, the whole metropolis appearing as one seamless entity. An illusion. He knew. Just like the illusion that money and power could fix anything. An illusion shattered by his inability to heal his son's wing or restore his confidence. "Why would you invite Lucian to join your program?" he asked, finally, still facing the window. "You must realize how out of place he would be." Because every young dragon deserves the chance to fly on their own terms, Daria answered. And because diversity strengthens our community, Lucian would benefit from meeting others facing similar challenges, and they would benefit from meeting him. Riker turned back to face her. And what would you want in return? Funding? Endorsement? Access to Drakenfire technology? For the first time, Daria looked genuinely offended. We're not a charity case, Mr. Drakenfire, and I'm not trying to manipulate you into supporting our program. This is simply an invitation for your son to participate in something that might help him. Nothing more. The dragon studied her for a long moment. There was no deception in her expression, no hidden agenda he could detect. It was disconcerting. In his world, every interaction had underlying motives. Every relationship was transactional in some way. I'll need to think about this, he said finally, and discuss it with Lucian. Daria nodded, rising from her chair. Of course. The decision should be his, not yours or mine. She placed a printed brochure on the table. Our next session is Thursday afternoon at 4. He's welcome to observe first, if that would make him more comfortable. As she turned to leave, Riker found himself asking, Why did you do it? Yesterday, at Skyreach, you risked your job for a dance with a child you didn't know. Daria paused at the door. Because he asked, she said simply. And because everyone deserves to lead sometimes, especially when the world keeps telling them they should only follow. After she left, Riker remained motionless for several minutes, her words echoing in his mind. Lead and follow. Such simple concepts, yet somehow revolutionary when applied to his relationship with his son. Had he been so focused on leading, on directing Lucian's recovery, on protecting him from failure, that he'd never allowed him to lead in his own healing journey? The question haunted him as he summoned his driver and headed home early for the first time in months. Lucian was surprised to see him, looking up from his studies with wide eyes when Riker entered the mansion's library, where the boy typically spent his afternoons with tutors. Father, is something wrong? No, Riker said, dismissing the tutor with a nod. I just thought we might talk about something. He placed the Wingspan brochure on the table between them. Have you ever heard of this program? Lucian picked up the brochure, his expression shifting from confusion to tentative interest as he scanned its contents. Flight therapy? With other dragons my age? Apparently. The woman from the restaurant last night, Miss Jensen, she helps run it. She invited you to attend their session on Thursday. Really? Lucian looked up, hope flickering across his features, before uncertainty clouded them again. But my regular therapy appointment with Dr. Williams is on Thursdays. We could reschedule, Riker found himself saying, surprising them both. If you wanted to try this instead. Lucien stared at him. You would let me go to this? In the Lower East District? The disbelief in his son's voice made Riker wince internally. Had he become so rigid, so controlling, that such a simple concession seemed unthinkable? I would accompany you, of course, he clarified. At least for the first visit, to ensure it's appropriate. But you'd let me try it? Lucian pressed, clearly still skeptical. Riker took a deep breath. Yes, if that's what you want. The smile that bloomed on his son's face was worth every ounce of discomfort the situation caused him. It occurred to Riker that he hadn't seen Lucian smile like that since before the accident. Perhaps not even since before they lost Arya. Thank you, Father, Lucian said, clutching the brochure as if it were a precious treasure. I want to go. I really do. Riker nodded, trying to ignore the anxiety churning in his gut. The Lower East District wasn't dangerous, exactly, but it was far from the controlled environments he typically allowed for his son. And this program, operating out of a warehouse with no official medical oversight, it went against every protective instinct he possessed. But the memory of Lucian dancing at Skyreach, moving with a confidence he hadn't shown in months, kept Riker from voicing his concerns. Perhaps it was time to try something different. Perhaps it was time to let his son lead. Just a little. Thursday arrived too quickly for Riker's comfort. He'd had his security team thoroughly investigate Wingspan, Dr. Elena Marsh, and the Jensen sisters. The reports indicated nothing concerning, quite the opposite, in fact. The program had an impressive success rate despite its limited resources. And Dr. Marsh was a respected researcher in adaptive flight therapy. The Jensen sisters had clean backgrounds, Zara with formal training in physical therapy, Daria pursuing a degree in adaptive education while working various service jobs to help fund their passion project. Still, as their private car descended into the Lower East District, Riker couldn't help but feel they were entering another world. The sleek glass and metal architecture of the financial district gave way to older, more eclectic structures. Anti-gravity technology was less prevalent here, with most buildings firmly anchored to the ground in traditional fashion. The warehouse that housed Wingspan was a large, repurposed industrial space with high ceilings and massive windows that flooded the interior with natural light. As they approached the entrance, Riker noticed the accessibility features: wide doorways designed to accommodate dragon wings, ramps alongside stairs, tactile guidance patterns on the floor for those with visual impairments. Inside, the space opened dramatically. The central area had been converted into a massive flight chamber, with padded floors and various obstacles and platforms at different heights. Around the perimeter were observation areas, equipment stations, and what appeared to be small meeting rooms. Most striking, however, were the participants. About a dozen young dragons, ranging from approximately 8 to 15 years old, were engaged in various activities throughout the space. Some wore wing braces, similar to Lucian's. Others had more minimal supports or different adaptive equipment entirely. What they all shared was a focus and engagement that seemed at odds with their physical challenges. Daria spotted them from across the room and approached with a welcoming smile. She wore simple athletic clothing rather than the formal server's uniform from Skyreach. Her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Lucian, Mr. Drakenfire, welcome to Wingspan. We're just getting started with our warm-up exercises if you'd like to observe. Or Lucian is welcome to join in whenever he feels comfortable." Lucian glanced up at his father, seeking permission even as excitement radiated from him. Riker nodded stiffly, and the young dragon immediately turned back to Daria. "Can I try now? What should I do first?" "Let me introduce you to Kira. She's been with us for about a year and is one of our peer mentors." Daria gestured toward a purple-scaled dragon girl who appeared to be about 12, with a specialized support system on her right wing that was far less cumbersome than Lucian's braces. As Daria led Lucian across the room, Riker found himself approached by a woman who looked remarkably similar to Daria, slightly older, with the same dark hair and determined expression. "You must be Lucian's father. I'm Zara Jensen, Daria's sister and co-founder of Wingspan." She extended her hand in the human greeting gesture, which Riker accepted after a moment's hesitation. "If you have questions while you're here, I'm happy to answer them." "What exactly will my son be doing?" Riker asked, watching as Lucian was introduced to several other young dragons in the warm-up area. "Today, mostly getting acquainted with our approach and community," Zara explained. "We don't push anyone beyond their comfort level, especially on their first day. Kira will show him our basic exercises and introduce our philosophy." "Which is?" "That flight is not just physical, it's emotional, social, and psychological. Traditional rehabilitation focuses almost exclusively on the mechanical aspects of wing function. We address the whole dragon." She gestured toward a group of parents and guardians seated in a comfortable observation area. "You're welcome to watch from there, or I can give you a tour of our facilities while Lucian gets acquainted." Riker hesitated. The protective part of him wanted to keep Lucian in his sight at all times, but he also recognized that his hovering presence might inhibit his son's participation. A tour would be informative, he decided finally, as Zara showed him around the facility, explaining their methodology and equipment. Riker found himself reluctantly impressed. Despite the obvious budget constraints, Wingspan had ingeniously repurposed and adapted various technologies to serve their needs. What they lacked in fancy medical equipment, they made up for in thoughtful design and creative problem-solving. Most of our adaptive equipment is custom-built, Zara explained, as they examined a lightweight wing support system. We work with a network of volunteer engineers and makers who help us create individualized solutions for each participant's specific needs. This is not what I expected, Riker admitted. Zara smiled. We get that a lot. People assume that effective therapy requires expensive equipment and clinical settings. Sometimes what's most healing is simply creating a space where differences are normalized and challenges are faced collectively. As they completed the tour and returned to the main area, Riker was startled to see Lucian already participating in a group exercise. The young dragons were arranged in a circle, each performing a simple wing-stretching movement to music, modifying the motion to accommodate their individual abilities. Lucian's face was flushed with concentration, but he was fully engaged, watching the others and following along as best he could with his cumbersome braces. He's doing well, Zara observed. Many first-timers just watch for the entire first session. Something tightened in Riker's chest as he watched his son, pride mingled with a strange sense of loss. As if Lucian was already growing beyond the protective bubble Riker had constructed around him. Your sister, he said suddenly. Why did she approach my son at Skyreach? Was this her plan all along? Zara looked surprised by the question. Daria didn't know who Lucian was until he asked her to dance. She's worked at Skyreach for less than a month. It's just her latest attempt to help fund this place. She glanced toward her sister, who was now assisting another young dragon with a stretching exercise. What happened at the restaurant wasn't planned, Mr. Drakenfire. It was just Daria being Daria, seeing someone who needed to be seen. Before Riker could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A group of people with camera equipment and press credentials were being politely but firmly blocked by Wingspan staff. What's happening? Riker asked, instantly alert to potential threats. Zara sighed. That would be the publicity side of our research partnership with Dr. Marsh. We're announcing the preliminary results of our study today, and apparently some press got overexcited and showed up early. They're supposed to be here after the session ends. She excused herself and hurried toward the entrance to assist with the situation. Riker followed, his protective instincts activating at the thought of journalists potentially photographing or filming his son in this environment. As he approached, he could hear Daria arguing with a woman in professional attire who appeared to be leading the media group. We agreed on 5:30, after all the participants have left or had the opportunity to opt into being photographed. Daria was saying firmly, This session is private. Dr. Marsh sent out the press release with a 4:30 time slot, the woman replied, showing something on her tablet. We're exactly where we were told to be, when we were told to be here. There must have been a miscommunication, Daria insisted. We never agreed to media presence during active therapy sessions. Riker stepped forward, his imposing presence immediately drawing attention. Is there a problem? The press representative's eyes widened as they recognized him, cameras instinctively lifting before Wingspan staff moved to block their view. Mr. Drakenfire, the lead journalist said, clearly surprised. Are you involved with Wingspan? Before he could respond, Dr. Elena Marsh herself hurried through the entrance, looking flustered. She was a tall, distinguished-looking human woman with silver-streaked hair and an air of academic authority. I'm so sorry for the confusion, she said quickly. There was a typo in the press release. It should have been 5:30, not 4:30. She turned to the journalists. My sincere apologies for bringing you here early. Perhaps you could wait at the cafe across the street. I'll personally come get you when we're ready. The journalists looked disappointed but began to disperse. One, however, had noticed Lucian among the young dragons and was whispering urgently to her colleagues while gesturing subtly in his direction. Riker caught the exchange and moved to intercept them. If any images of my son appear in your publications without my express consent, you'll be hearing from my legal team, he said quietly, but with unmistakable menace. The journalists retreated quickly, but the damage was already done. Word was spreading among the participants that media had arrived, and several of the young dragons, including Lucian, were now looking anxiously toward the entrance. I should never have agreed to this, Riker muttered, moving quickly to extract his son from what was rapidly becoming a chaotic situation. But Daria intercepted him, her expression determined. Mr. Drakenfire, please wait. This is unfortunate timing, but not a crisis. Let me speak with the participants. Without waiting for his response, she moved to the center of the room and called for everyone's attention. Hey, Wingspan family. So we had a bit of a scheduling mix-up, and some journalists arrived early for our press conference about our research with Dr. Marsh. They've agreed to wait outside until our regular session is finished, but I wanted to let you all know what's happening. She continued with remarkable transparency, explaining the research study, the preliminary findings, and why they were sharing them with the press. This is completely optional, but after our session ends, those of you who are interested can stay for the press conference. With parent or guardian permission, of course, she added, glancing toward the observation area where other families watched. Dr. Marsh will be presenting the data, and some of you might be asked about your experiences with Wingspan. Again, totally optional, and no pressure at all. The young dragons exchanged excited glances, many clearly intrigued by the idea of being part of something newsworthy. Lucian, however, looked to his father with uncertainty. Riker moved to his son's side. We're leaving, he said quietly but firmly. This isn't what we agreed to. But father, Lucian began, then stopped, his expression falling as he recognized the futility of arguing. He nodded resignedly and started to follow Riker toward the exit. Daria approached them, her eyes pleading. Lucian was doing so well with the group exercises. Couldn't he at least finish the session? The press won't return until after it's over. This was supposed to be a private therapeutic environment, Riker said coldly. Not a media circus. It's still a therapeutic environment, Daria insisted. The press conference is separate from our work with the participants, and this research could help us secure funding to help more young dragons like Lucian. We don't need your help, Riker replied. I can arrange for private therapy with the best specialists in the city. Something flashed in Daria's eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or disappointment. With all due respect, Mr. Drakenfire, this isn't about what you need. It's about what Lucian needs. And sometimes that might include experiences you didn't plan or control. The words struck too close to home, echoing his own recent doubts about his parenting approach. He glanced down at Lucian, who was watching the exchange with anxious eyes. What do you want to do? Riker found himself asking his son, surprising them both. Lucian hesitated, clearly torn between his desire to continue with the session and his ingrained habit of deferring to his father's judgment. I'd like to stay, if that's all right, he said finally. The stretching exercises were helping with my left wing. It didn't hurt as much when I tried to extend it. The simple statement, so practical, so focused on his own physical experience, rather than Riker's expectations, gave the older dragon pause. When was the last time he'd asked Lucian what he wanted? When was the last time he'd truly listened to his son's assessment of his own body, his own needs? Very well, Riker conceded. We'll stay until the end of the regular session. Then we'll leave before the press returns. Relief washed over Lucian's face. "Thank you, Father." Daria smiled at them both. "Thank you." Kira was just about to demonstrate a new stretching technique that I think might be particularly helpful for Lucian's type of injury. As Lucian rejoined the group, Riker returned to the observation area, his thoughts in turmoil. He'd spent months making decisions for his son, convinced that his wealth and influence could provide the best possible care. Yet here, in this converted warehouse with its modest equipment and community-based approach, Lucian seemed more engaged in his recovery than he had been with all the expensive specialists and cutting-edge technology Riker had procured. The session continued for another hour, concluding with a cool-down exercise that had all the participants lying on their backs on cushioned mats, gently extending their wings while focusing on their breathing. Even from a distance, Riker could see the change in Lucian's demeanor, a calmness, an integration of body and mind that had been absent for months. As the session ended, the young dragons gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. Some, with their parents' permission, were staying for the press conference, excited to be part of the public announcement about the program's success. Lucian approached his father, his expression both tired and energized. "They showed me some stretches I can do at home," he said eagerly. "And Kira said her braces used to be as big as mine. But now she only needs the minimal support." Riker nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm glad you found it helpful. We should go now, before the press returns." But as they moved toward the exit, Dr. Marsh approached them, her expression earnest. "Mr. Drakenfire, before you leave, I wanted to thank you for allowing Lucian to participate today. Our research shows that diverse participation strengthens outcomes for everyone involved." "We're not committing to regular attendance," Riker said firmly. "This was a trial session." "Of course," she acknowledged. "But, even so, having someone with Lucian's specific injury pattern in our study would be invaluable. His particular fracture type is relatively rare, and the data could help us refine our approach for similar cases in the future." Riker frowned. "You want to include my son in your research?" "Only with your full informed consent. Obviously," Dr. Marsh clarified quickly. "We follow all ethical guidelines for research involving minors. The participants' identities are strictly protected in our published findings." "Unless they choose to appear at press conferences," Riker pointed out dryly. Dr. Marsh looked uncomfortable. "That's separate from the research itself, a publicity strategy to help secure continued funding." "Which reminds me," Daria said, joining the conversation. "We should prepare for the journalists' return. They'll be back any minute." As if on cue, the staff began rearranging the space, setting up chairs, and preparing a small podium for the press conference. The young dragons who were staying gathered excitedly nearby, some practicing what they might say if interviewed. Lucian watched the activity with obvious interest. "Father," he began hesitantly, "could we maybe stay, just to watch?" Riker was about to refuse when he caught sight of Kira, the young dragon who had mentored Lucian during the session. She was removing the minimal support brace from her right wing, demonstrating to a smaller dragon how she could now extend it almost normally. The conversation was just within earshot. "It took me 8 months to get from the full brace to this," she was saying. "The doctor said I'd always need full support, but the exercises here proved them wrong." Lucian was watching the demonstration with rapt attention, his expression a mixture of hope and determination. It was the most engaged, the most present Riker had seen him since the accident. "We can stay for a little while," Riker found himself saying, "but we'll remain in the back, out of the photographer's view." The press returned promptly at 5:30, setting up their equipment efficiently. Dr. Marsh took her position at the podium, with Daria and Zara flanking her. The participating young dragons sat in a semicircle nearby, looking both nervous and proud. "Thank you all for coming," Dr. Marsh began, her voice clear and authoritative. Today, we're announcing the preliminary findings of a 2-year study on community-based flight therapy for young dragons with wing injuries and congenital flight limitations. She proceeded to present the data, which was impressively rigorous despite the program's modest resources. Participants in Wingspan showed significantly better outcomes than control groups receiving traditional therapy alone, not just in physical recovery metrics, but in psychological well-being, social integration, and overall quality of life. What makes Wingspan unique, Dr. Marsh continued, is its holistic approach. Rather than treating wing injuries as purely mechanical problems, the program addresses the emotional and social dimensions of flight limitation. The peer support model, in particular, shows remarkable effectiveness in building confidence and resilience. As the presentation continued, journalists began asking questions, mostly to Dr. Marsh about the methodology and findings, but occasionally to the young participants about their experiences. They responded with surprising poise, clearly proud of their progress and eager to share their stories. Riker noticed that Lucian was listening intently, occasionally nodding in recognition when other young dragons described challenges similar to his own. For the first time, perhaps, he was seeing his experience as part of a broader pattern rather than a personal failure. One journalist raised her hand. I understand that traditional wing rehabilitation can be prohibitively expensive for many families. How is Wingspan funded, and is the model sustainable? Daria stepped forward to answer. Currently, we operate on a combination of community donations, small grants, and volunteer support. It's sustainable in the sense that we're making it work, but our resources are limited. We could help many more young dragons with additional funding. Which is why this research is so important, Dr. Marsh added. We hope these findings will help secure more substantial support for programs like Wingspan. Another journalist, who had earlier noticed Lucian, raised his hand. Is it true that Riker Drakenfire's son is participating in your program? That would certainly raise your profile significantly. The question sent a murmur through the crowd, heads turning to scan the room. Daria's expression remained composed, but Riker could see the tension in her shoulders. We don't discuss the identities of our participants without their explicit consent, she said firmly. Wingspan welcomes young dragons from all backgrounds, and we respect everyone's privacy equally. Despite her diplomatic answer, several journalists were now craning their necks, trying to spot Riker and Lucian in the back of the room. Riker placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder, preparing to make a swift exit. But before they could move, Lucian straightened his posture and whispered, Father, I want to try something. Please trust me. Before Riker could respond, Lucian stepped forward into the open area behind the seated participants. The movement immediately drew all eyes to him, his distinctive gold scales and elaborate wing braces making his identity unmistakable. A hush fell over the room as Lucian raised his hand to speak. Daria looked alarmed, but nodded for him to proceed. My name is Lucian Drakenfire, he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite its softness. This was my first day at Wingspan, but I've learned more about my wings in one session here than in months of traditional therapy. Cameras turned toward him, capturing his image as he continued. The most important thing I learned today is that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about finding new ways to be whole. Then, with deliberate movements, Lucian reached for the main support strut of his left wing brace, the one that had been calibrated to prevent any independent movement. His claws found the release mechanism that Riker knew was supposed to be accessible only to medical professionals. Before anyone could stop him, Lucian disengaged the primary lock. The mechanical whir of the brace recalibrating filled the suddenly silent room as the structure shifted from full support to partial mobility mode. Slowly, with visible effort, but remarkable determination, Lucian extended his injured wing partway, the first independent wing movement he had attempted in public since the accident. The motion was limited and clearly painful, but it was unquestionably deliberate. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment as Lucian held the position for several seconds before carefully folding his wing back into its supported rest position. "I'm not fixed," he said simply, "but I'm healing, and I'm grateful to have found a place that understands the difference." The room erupted in applause, led by the other young dragons who understood better than anyone the significance of what they had just witnessed. Journalists were scribbling notes frantically or speaking urgently into recording devices. Riker stood frozen, a storm of emotions raging within him. Pride in his son's courage, fear for the pain Lucian must be feeling, anger at the public nature of this deeply personal moment, and beneath it all, a profound realization that his son had just taken control of his own narrative in a way Riker had never allowed, never even considered possible. As the applause died down, Lucian returned to his father's side, his expression a mixture of pain and triumph. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you," he said quietly. "But I needed to do that." Riker found his voice at last. "You didn't embarrass me," he said, his throat tight with emotion. "You surprised me." The press conference continued, but the story had clearly shifted. No longer was this merely about academic research findings. It was now about the Drakenfire heir publicly endorsing an unconventional community program, challenging the very medical establishment his family's wealth typically supported. Riker knew the implications immediately. By tomorrow, Wingspan would be flooded with attention, positive and negative. His business associates would question his judgment. The medical specialists he'd hired would be offended. And Lucian would be at the center of a media storm. His recovery journey now a public narrative beyond Riker's ability to control. As these realizations crashed over him, Riker caught Daria's eye across the room. She looked as stunned as he felt, clearly not having anticipated Lucian's actions. But beneath her surprise, he saw something else, a fierce pride, not for herself or her program, but for Lucian's act of self-determination. In that moment, Riker understood what she had been trying to tell him all along. His son needed more than protection. He needed the space to find his own path, to make his own choices, even if those choices involved risk, even if they led in directions Riker hadn't planned. The press conference concluded, and journalists began packing up their equipment, many attempting to approach Riker and Lucian for additional comments. Wingspan staff formed a protective barrier, politely but firmly directing the press toward the exit. Daria made her way to them, concern evident in her expression. "Lucienne, are you all right? That was unexpected." "My wing hurts," he admitted. "But it's a good kind of hurt, like I'm using muscles that needed to wake up." "We should still have Dr. Samuels check the alignment," Riker said, naming Lucian's primary specialist, to ensure no damage was done. Lucian nodded, accepting this reasonable precaution without argument. "Can I come back to Wingspan?" he asked, looking between his father and Daria. "Even after this?" He gestured vaguely toward where the press had been. Daria smiled. "Of course. You're always welcome here." They both looked to Riker, whose mind was racing with calculations, contingencies, ways to mitigate the coming media storm. But beneath all that strategic thinking, one truth was becoming increasingly clear. His son had found something he needed at Wingspan, something all Riker's wealth and influence hadn't been able to provide. "We'll discuss it," he said finally, "after we've had Dr. Samuels check your wing." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and from the way Lucian's expression brightened, it was clear he recognized the shift in his father's stance. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Marsh approached them once more. "Mr. Drakenfire, I realize this evening took an unexpected turn, but I hope you'll consider allowing Lucian to participate in our research. His progress could help many others with similar injuries." Riker regarded her thoughtfully. "Send me your full research protocol. I'll have my team review it. Of course, she agreed readily. And there's one other matter. Given what happened today, there will inevitably be significant media interest in Wingspan. We're not equipped to handle that kind of attention without additional support. Are you asking for money, Dr. Marsh? Riker asked directly. I'm suggesting a potential alignment of interests, she replied diplomatically. Wingspan needs resources to expand its capacity. You presumably want to ensure that your son's involvement with the program is represented accurately and positively in the media. Perhaps there's a mutually beneficial arrangement to be found. Riker was about to dismiss the suggestion outright when Daria joined the conversation, her expression resolute. With respect, Dr. Marsh, we need to be careful about maintaining our independence, she said firmly. Wingspan's approach works precisely because we operate outside the traditional power structures of medical rehabilitation. Any funding arrangement would need to preserve that autonomy. Her willingness to potentially refuse a powerful dragon's money, especially after explicitly stating their need for funding, caught Riker's attention. Most humans in his experience became deferential in the presence of wealth, eager to accommodate his preferences in exchange for financial support. What would your terms be, Miss Jensen? He asked, curious despite himself. Daria seemed surprised by the question but answered without hesitation. Complete program autonomy. No interference with our teaching methodology or community approach. Funding security for at least 5 years, regardless of interim results. And a commitment to making our methods accessible to those who can't afford traditional therapy. Not just those who can. Riker raised an eyebrow. Those are demanding terms. They're necessary ones, Daria replied simply. Wingspan isn't just a therapy program. It's a philosophy about how young dragons should be supported through challenges. If funding compromises that philosophy, we'd be helping no one in the long run. There was a clarity of purpose in her eyes that Riker found oddly compelling. In his world of complex financial negotiations and strategic corporate maneuvering, such straightforward conviction was rare. I'll consider it, he said finally. But I'll need to see more than one session before making any commitments. That's fair, Daria acknowledged. We have sessions 3 times a week. Lucian is welcome at any of them, as are you. As they finally left Wingspan, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows between the buildings of the Lower East District. Their driver was waiting with the private car, looking somewhat out of place among the more modest vehicles lining the street. During the ride home, Lucian was unusually talkative, describing the exercises he'd learned and the other young dragons he'd met. Riker listened, struck by the animation in his son's voice, the way his hands moved expressively as he spoke. It was as if some vital spark had been reignited, not just in Lucian's injured wing, but in his spirit. Kira said I could try the hover platform next time, Lucian was saying. It's not real flight, but it simulates the air currents so your wings can remember the patterns they need. Next time, Riker repeated, the words both a question and a tentative commitment. Lucian glanced at him hopefully. If Dr. Samuels says it's okay? If Dr. Samuels says it's okay, Riker confirmed. The medical examination the following day revealed no negative impacts from Lucian's demonstration at the press conference. In fact, Dr. Samuels seemed cautiously impressed by the increased range of motion Lucian displayed, though he warned against removing the primary support too frequently or for extended periods. Whatever exercises they're doing at this Wingspan program, they seem to be activating the secondary flight muscles without straining the primary healing sites, the doctor admitted. It's unorthodox, but I can't argue with the biomechanical readings. With medical clearance secured, Riker found himself accompanying Lucian to Wingspan twice more that week. Each session revealed new dimensions of the program, the careful progression of exercises, the emphasis on peer teaching, the celebration of even small improvements. Most striking to Riker was the atmosphere of collaborative achievement rather than competitive advancement. so different from the environments he typically inhabited. True to Dr. Marsh's prediction, media interest in Wingspan exploded following Lucian's public demonstration. Requests for interviews flooded in, along with an influx of new participants seeking to join the program. The converted warehouse quickly began to feel inadequate for the growing demand. 2 weeks after their first visit, Riker requested a meeting with Daria, Zara, and Dr. Marsh at Drakenfire Tower. They arrived punctually, looking somewhat out of place in the sleek corporate environment, but carrying themselves with quiet confidence. Riker had spent those 2 weeks observing, analyzing, and, most unusually for him, reflecting on his own assumptions about recovery, about parenting, about the nature of strength itself. He had watched his son grow more confident with each session, had seen him forge connections with peers who understood his challenges in ways Riker could not, had witnessed moments of frustration transformed into determination rather than defeat. "Thank you for coming," he began formally, as they settled into the conference room he'd selected for this meeting, smaller and less intimidating than his private office. "I've been impressed by what I've observed at Wingspan these past 2 weeks." "We're glad to hear that," Zara replied. "Lucien has been a wonderful addition to our community. His determination is inspiring the younger participants especially." Riker nodded, then got directly to the point. "I'm prepared to offer Wingspan a 5-year funding commitment through the Drakenfire Foundation. The amount would be sufficient to secure a larger facility, expand your equipment inventory, and hire additional staff as needed." The 3 women exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the scale of the offer. "That's extremely generous," Dr. Marsh said carefully. "May I ask what conditions would be attached to this funding?" 3 conditions, Riker replied, his gaze fixed on Daria. "First, Wingspan maintains complete programmatic autonomy, as Miss Jensen stipulated. Second, a portion of the funding must be allocated to scholarships for participants who cannot afford even modest fees. And third, Miss Jensen remains in her leadership role for the duration of the funding period, with full authority over program development." Daria looked startled. "Me? Not Zara? She's the one with the formal therapy credentials." "You're both essential to the program's success," Riker acknowledged. "But your approach, your philosophy about autonomy and self-determination, that's what Lucian has responded to most strongly. That's what I believe makes Wingspan unique." The sisters exchanged a meaningful look, some unspoken understanding passing between them. "We'd need to see the specific terms in writing," Zara said practically, "and have our legal advisor review them." "Of course," Riker agreed. "I'll have the Foundation's legal team draft an agreement for your review. But I wanted to discuss the framework in person first, to ensure alignment on the fundamental principles." Dr. Marsh leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "May I ask what prompted this decision, Mr. Drakenfire? 2 weeks ago, you seemed skeptical about our entire approach." Riker was silent for a moment, formulating his response. "Yesterday, Lucian asked if he could lead our morning flight practice," he said finally. "It's a simple ritual we've maintained since he was very young. A few basic maneuvers at sunrise in our private atrium. Since the accident, I've been guiding him through modified versions of the sequences, essentially doing the movements for both of us." He paused, the memory still fresh and powerful. "But yesterday, he wanted to lead. His movements were limited, imperfect by conventional standards. But they were his. And for the first time since the accident, he finished the sequence smiling instead of frustrated." Riker met Daria's eyes directly. "You were right, Miss Jensen. There is a profound difference between protection and respect, between leading and following. I'm still learning that difference, but I recognize its value now." The funding agreement was finalized within a month. True to his word, Riker attached no strings that would compromise Wingspan's core philosophy. The program relocated to a spacious former sports arena that offered room for expanded flight practice areas, research facilities, and community gathering spaces. Enrollment tripled within 6 months, with young dragons from across the socioeconomic spectrum participating side by side. Lucian continued his involvement, gradually transitioning from participant to peer mentor as his recovery progressed. The elaborate titanium braces gave way to progressively lighter supports until, on the 1-year anniversary of his first visit to Wingspan, he managed a short, unassisted flight during a community celebration. The moment was captured not by press photographers this time, but by Riker himself, who had learned to use a camera to document his son's journey. The image, Lucian hovering briefly, with fully extended wings, surrounded by cheering peers, became the new logo for Wingspan's materials. Dr. Marsh's research continued, with rigorous documentation of the program's outcomes, leading to publications in prestigious medical journals and presentations at international conferences. Traditional rehabilitation centers began incorporating elements of Wingspan's approach, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the original program. Daria Jensen eventually completed her degree in adaptive education, writing a thesis on the psychology of flight recovery that became required reading in several university programs. When she received a prestigious innovation award for her work with Wingspan, Riker attended the ceremony not as a patron, but as a friend and fellow advocate. "The true innovation of Wingspan isn't in its techniques or technologies," Daria said in her acceptance speech. "It's in its fundamental belief that healing happens best when we honor each individual's need to lead their own journey. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do for someone is not to lift them up, but to step back and let them rise on their own terms." In the audience, Riker nodded in quiet agreement. He had learned that lesson through his son, through watching Lucian find his wings again, not in the way Riker had planned or expected, but in a way that was authentically his own. It was a humbling lesson for a dragon accustomed to controlling his environment, to solving problems through the application of wealth and power. Some journeys, he had discovered, could not be purchased or directed. Some had to be followed, one uncertain step at a time, trusting in the strength of those leading the way, even when, perhaps especially when, those leaders were the ones you had thought needed your protection most. As the audience applauded Daria's speech, Riker glanced at his son seated beside him. Lucian's wings were extended in the relaxed posture of a young dragon comfortable in his body, the minimal support structure now barely visible against his golden scales. His eyes were fixed on Daria with admiration and respect, the same expression Riker had once hoped his son would direct toward him. But Riker found he didn't mind. Leadership took many forms. He had learned. Sometimes it meant directing from the front. Sometimes it meant supporting from behind. And sometimes, most profoundly, it meant recognizing when to follow those who showed the courage to lead in new directions, especially when those leaders came from unexpected places, like a human waitress brave enough to dance with a dragon child when no one else would see his worth.